Before the world learned to fear the name Adrian
We must
Moretti,
ensure the shipping
there was a
routes are
woman
secure.
standing quietly beside him who understood power better than anyone around him. To outsiders, Valentina Cross appeared to be nothing more than the elegant wife of one of America's most dangerous mafia leaders. She attended expensive events, wore designer clothing, and remained calm while powerful men discussed business around her. Many believed she was protected by the empire Adrian built. But they never understood the truth. Valentina was not protected by the empire. She was the reason the empire survived. For years, the Moretti organization had been considered one of the strongest criminal networks in the country. Adrian Moretti was known as a brilliant and fearless don who could negotiate with enemies, expand influence, and maintain control over dangerous situations. His reputation alone was enough to make rivals think twice before challenging him. However, behind every major victory, there was a hidden pattern that nobody noticed. Every impossible deal, every unexpected alliance, every enemy mistake, someone had already predicted it. That person was Valentina Cross. From the beginning of her marriage to Adrian, Valentina understood that the mafia world respected visible strength but feared invisible intelligence. She knew that a person who stood in the spotlight became the first target. While Adrian carried the public image of power, Valentina remained in the background, observing every movement around the empire. She studied people. She studied weaknesses. She studied the hidden reasons behind every decision. The most dangerous people in the mafia world were not always the ones holding weapons or making threats. Sometimes they were the ones who could predict what others would do before they even made their move. Valentina understood this better than anyone. Her calm personality caused many people to underestimate her. During meetings, older mafia leaders often ignored her presence. They assumed she was there because of her marriage, not because of her intelligence. They believed the empire belonged to Adrian alone. That misunderstanding became Valentina's greatest advantage. The more invisible she became, the more control she gained. While others competed for attention, she collected information. While enemies focused on Adrian's public decisions, she studied their private intentions. She noticed small changes in loyalty, financial movements, and relationships between powerful families. To everyone else, these details seemed meaningless. To Valentina, they were warnings. She knew an empire did not collapse because of one major enemy. It collapsed because leaders ignored small signs until it was too late. Adrian Moretti understood something that others did not. He knew Valentina was different. He had watched her quietly solve problems that seemed impossible. He had seen her recognize danger before his most experienced advisors. Yet even Adrian protected her secret. He allowed the world to believe he was the only person controlling the empire because revealing Valentina's true influence would put a target on her back. Their marriage was not just built on loyalty or appearance. It was built on a partnership where both understood the dangerous world they lived in. But power always attracts challenges. A rival mafia family began watching the Moretti empire closely. They believed Adrian had become too comfortable. They believed his marriage had created a weakness. They saw Valentina as the perfect opportunity to reach the dawn. They made the same mistake everyone else had made. They believed the quiet woman beside Adrian Moretti was his weakness. They had no idea she was the person who had been protecting him all along. And when the first attack against the Moretti Empire finally began, the enemies discovered something that would change everything. The woman they planned to ignore had already planned their downfall before they even made their first move. The attack against the Moretti Empire was supposed to expose Adrian Moretti's weakness. Rival families believed they had finally found a way to challenge the most powerful mafia organization in America. They studied Adrian's public image, his business connections, and his reputation as a ruthless leader. They believed every empire had a point where it could collapse, and they were convinced they had discovered his. But they were searching in the wrong place. For years, the world believed Adrian Moretti built his empire through fear, strategy, and control. His name became associated with power because every enemy saw him as the person responsible for every decision. When deals succeeded, people praised his intelligence. When enemies disappeared, they credited his influence. Nobody looked deeper. Nobody questioned why Adrian always seemed prepared for situations before they happened. The reason was hidden behind the walls of his private estate. Valentina Cross. Long before a crisis reached Adrian's desk, Valentina had already studied the possibilities. She understood that the Mafia world was not controlled only by strength. It was controlled by information, timing, and the ability to recognize danger before it arrived. While Adrian handled the public side of the empire, Valentina quietly managed the invisible battles. She monitored relationships between rival families. She noticed when trusted partners became distant. She recognized financial patterns that suggested betrayal. She understood human behavior in a way that even experienced mafia leaders failed to see. Her greatest weapon was not authority. It was awareness. Valentina never needed to demand respect because she understood something powerful people often forgot. True influence did not always need to be announced. Some people controlled rooms by speaking loudly. Others controlled entire organizations by understanding what everyone else ignored. Valentina belonged to the second group. Inside the Moretti organization, many members believed Adrian's success came from his ability to intimidate opponents. They admired his confidence and feared his decisions. However, the few people closest to him knew there was another force guiding the empire. Before Adrian accepted dangerous agreements, Valentina had already analyzed the risks. Before he trusted new allies, she had already studied their history. Before enemies created plans against him, she had already considered their possible strategies. Her intelligence became the invisible foundation beneath the empire. However, staying hidden came with a cost. Valentina watched others receive credit for ideas she created. She saw powerful men celebrate victories they would never have achieved without her guidance. She remained silent because recognition was dangerous. In her world, attention was not always a reward. Sometimes attention was a threat. If enemies discovered that Adrian's wife was the true strategist behind the empire, they would stop seeing her as a harmless figure. They would understand that removing her could weaken everything. That was why Adrian protected the secret. He knew the world was already dangerous for a mafia leader. It would become even more dangerous for the person secretly controlling the moves behind him. But secrets rarely remain hidden forever. As the Moretti empire continued expanding, certain members inside the organization began noticing unusual patterns. They realized Adrian's decisions were always supported by information that appeared impossible to obtain. They noticed how quickly problems disappeared after Valentina became involved. Questions started spreading. Some wondered whether Adrian truly controlled the empire alone. Others wondered who the woman beside him really was. At the same time, a powerful rival family began preparing a new attack. They believed they understood the Moretti organization completely. They studied Adrian's habits, his weaknesses, and his public image. But they never studied Valentina. That mistake would become their greatest failure. Because the enemy was preparing a battle against Adrian Moretti. And they had no idea they were already fighting against the mind that built his victories. When the first move was finally made, the response came faster than anyone expected. The empire did not react with panic. It reacted with a plan that had been created long before the enemy entered the battlefield. The rival family believed they had finally discovered the perfect opportunity to weaken the Moretti empire. For months, they had watched Adrian Moretti's movements, studied his business connections, and searched for signs of vulnerability. They believed the Don had become too confident because of his success. They believed his empire had one weakness: his wife. To them, Valentina Cross was simply a woman who lived beside power without understanding it. They saw her elegant appearance, her quiet behavior, and her distance from public conflicts as proof that she had no real influence. They could not have been more wrong. The first attack began with carefully planned pressure against the Moretti organization. Several important partnerships suddenly faced problems. Trusted connections started receiving offers from rival groups. Members of the empire began questioning whether Adrian's leadership was still strong enough to survive a serious challenge. The enemy expected confusion. They expected panic. They expected Adrian Moretti to respond with anger and force. But instead, something unexpected happened. The Moretti empire remained calm. Behind closed doors, Valentina Cross had already recognized the signs of the attack before it began. She had noticed unusual financial movements, strange communication patterns, and changes in the behavior of certain people connected to the organization. While everyone else was reacting to the enemy's actions, Valentina was already studying their reasons. She understood that powerful enemies rarely revealed their true intentions through their first move. The first attack was usually a test. It was designed to create fear, expose weaknesses, and discover how quickly the opponent could adapt. Valentina refused to give them that information. Instead of fighting emotionally, she created a strategy based on patience and precision. The response surprised everyone inside the Moretti organization. The problems that were expected to damage the empire began disappearing one by one. Business relationships recovered. Hidden connections were exposed. Rival plans failed before they reached their final stage. People started asking the same question. How did Adrian know exactly what to do? The answer was standing beside him. For the first time, some members of the organization began looking at Valentina differently. They noticed that Adrian did not make major decisions without considering her perspective. They noticed that experienced leaders listened when she spoke, even if they pretended not to. Respect slowly replaced doubt. But admiration was not the only reaction. Fear began growing among certain members of the empire. Some people believed the traditional structure of the Mafia was changing. They were uncomfortable with the idea that a woman could have more strategic influence than powerful men who had spent decades building their reputations. They did not understand that Valentina had never taken power from them. She had simply earned power they refused to recognize. For Adrian, the situation created a difficult realization. Protecting Valentina's secret was becoming harder. The more successful she became, the more impossible it was to hide her influence. He knew the world would eventually discover the truth. And when it did, enemies would no longer see her as the Don's wife. They would see her as the greatest threat to their ambitions. Meanwhile, someone inside the organization began searching for answers. A trusted member who had served the Moretti family for years started investigating how Valentina knew so much. He followed records. He studied old decisions. He looked for proof that Adrian was not the only person controlling the empire. The investigation led him to a discovery that changed everything. Hidden inside the organization's private records was evidence showing that some of Adrian Moretti's greatest victories were connected to decisions made by Valentina years earlier. The truth was no longer a suspicion. It was becoming undeniable. The woman everyone ignored had been controlling the direction of the empire from the shadows. But the person who discovered the truth did not see Valentina as a genius. He saw her as a threat that needed to be removed. And his next decision would create the most dangerous betrayal the Moretti Empire had ever faced. The Moretti Empire had survived countless enemies from outside its walls, but the greatest danger was not approaching from a rival family. It was already standing among the people Adrian Moretti trusted the most. For years, Marcus Bellini had been one of the most respected figures inside the organization. He was not a soldier who followed orders blindly. He was an experienced advisor who understood the traditions of the Mafia world and had helped Adrian strengthen his position after he inherited control of the empire. To many people, Marcus represented loyalty. But behind that loyalty was something far more dangerous: pride. Marcus had spent his entire life believing that power belonged to those who openly fought for it. He believed leadership was earned through fear, reputation, and control. When he discovered that many of Adrian's greatest victories were influenced by Valentina Cross, he struggled to accept the truth. In his mind, a woman could support the empire. She could protect the family. But she could never be the person controlling it. That belief became the beginning of his betrayal. Marcus started quietly investigating Valentina's role inside the organization. He searched through old records, studied past decisions, and followed connections that were never meant to be noticed. The more he discovered, the more frustrated he became. He realized that Valentina had been several steps ahead of everyone for years. She had predicted conflicts before they happened. She had identified dangerous people before they revealed themselves. She had protected the empire without asking for recognition. Instead of respecting her intelligence, Marcus became threatened by it. He believed her influence weakened the traditional structure of the Mafia world. He convinced himself that removing Valentina would restore balance and return the empire to the way it was supposed to operate. But Marcus made the same mistake as every other enemy before him. He underestimated her. Valentina noticed the changes long before anyone else did. She saw small differences in Marcus's behavior. She noticed missing information, unusual meetings, and the subtle signs of someone who believed they were hiding their intentions. But she did not confront him immediately. She understood that revealing suspicion too early would only force the enemy to disappear before she understood the full plan. Instead, she watched. She waited. She allowed Marcus to believe he was in control. This was the difference between Valentina and the people who challenged her. Others reacted to danger. She studied it. Meanwhile, Adrian began noticing the emotional distance between his trusted advisor and the rest of the organization. He had spent years believing Marcus was one of the few people who truly understood loyalty. The possibility of betrayal affected him deeply. For Adrian, power had always been easier to handle than disappointment. Enemies could be expected. Betrayal from someone close was different. It forced him to question everything he believed about trust. As Valentina continued investigating, she uncovered evidence that Marcus was not working alone. The betrayal inside the organization was connected to outside forces that wanted to destroy the Moretti empire from within. The attack was no longer about removing one person. It was about replacing the entire foundation of power. Marcus believed he was saving the empire. But he did not understand that the empire had already been protected by the person he wanted gone. The final piece of evidence finally appeared, revealing the true scale of the betrayal. And when Valentina uncovered who was behind Marcus's actions, she realized the enemy was not trying to take Adrian's empire. They were trying to erase the woman who secretly built it. For years, Valentina Cross allowed the world to believe she was simply the woman standing beside Adrian Moretti. She accepted the image people created for her because it protected something far more valuable than reputation. It protected her ability to control the future. In the Mafia world, attention was dangerous. The person everyone watched became the person everyone wanted to destroy. Valentina understood this reality better than anyone. She knew that if enemies discovered her true influence too early, they would stop attacking Adrian's empire from the outside and start hunting the person who kept it alive from within. But after Marcus Bellini's betrayal, hiding was no longer possible. The empire was beginning to understand that Valentina was not an observer. She was the strategist behind the victories everyone celebrated. The evidence collected during the investigation revealed a truth that shocked even some of Adrian's oldest allies. Years before becoming the Don's wife, Valentina had already developed the skills that made her dangerous. She was raised around powerful people who taught her that information was more valuable than force. She learned how alliances were created, how enemies revealed themselves, and how small decisions could change the balance of power. Unlike many people in the Mafia world, Valentina never wanted attention. She wanted control over outcomes. Her greatest strength was not making people fear her. It was making people underestimate her. For years, she allowed powerful men to believe they were smarter than her. She allowed rivals to ignore her presence during negotiations. She allowed enemies to focus on Adrian while she quietly studied their weaknesses. Every assumption made against her became another advantage. But the revelation changed the way people inside the empire viewed her. Some felt admiration. Others felt fear. Because they realized something uncomfortable. The woman they had dismissed had been protecting them for years. Adrian Moretti was not surprised by the truth becoming public. He had always known the depth of Valentina's intelligence. But seeing others finally understand her importance created a different emotion. He realized how much she had sacrificed. While he received public recognition, Valentina carried private responsibility. While people celebrated his victories, she carried the pressure of preventing disasters that nobody else even knew existed. Her silence had never meant weakness. It had been discipline. However, the discovery also created a new danger. When people realized Valentina was the true strategist behind the empire, they began questioning whether Adrian was still the real leader. Some wondered whether the Don was only the face of the organization while his wife controlled everything behind the scenes. That question created tension, because power does not only create enemies, it creates uncertainty. Valentina knew that revealing her identity would change the empire forever. She had spent years protecting Adrian's position, but now she had to decide whether continuing to hide was still the right choice. The world had finally discovered the woman behind the throne. But the greatest secret had not yet been revealed. During the investigation into Marcus's betrayal, Valentina discovered hidden documents connected to her own past. The files suggested that the attack against the Moretti Empire was not simply about power. Someone had been preparing for her rise long before she became Adrian Moretti's wife. The discovery forced Valentina to question everything she believed about her journey. Because the enemy was not afraid of the empire Adrian built. They were afraid of the empire Valentina was destined to create. The discovery of the hidden documents changed the way Valentina Cross viewed the entire conflict. For years, she believed the threats against the Moretti Empire came from ordinary rivals who wanted wealth, territory, and influence. But the truth was far more complicated. The enemy was not simply trying to defeat Adrian Moretti. They were trying to challenge Valentina herself. The documents revealed that someone had been studying her strategies for years. Someone had watched the way she operated, analyzed her decisions, and waited for the perfect moment to expose her. This was not a simple attack driven by revenge. It was a battle between two minds. The person behind the conspiracy understood that defeating Adrian through force would be difficult. The Don had built a reputation that protected him from direct challenges. His enemies knew that attacking him openly would create consequences they could not control. But they believed Valentina was different. They believed removing the person behind the decisions would create chaos inside the empire. They underestimated one important fact. Valentina had spent her entire life preparing for people who thought they were smarter than her. The mastermind behind the attack was revealed as Lorenzo Devereux, a powerful strategist from a rival organization. Unlike other enemies who depended on intimidation, Lorenzo depended on manipulation. He understood people, emotions, and weaknesses. He believed intelligence was the only weapon powerful enough to destroy the Moretti Empire. For the first time, Valentina faced someone who could predict her methods. Every move she planned seemed to have a counter. Every strategy she created was challenged. The battle was no longer about controlling businesses or defeating rival families. It was about proving who could think several steps ahead. Valentina knew that reacting emotionally would give Lorenzo exactly what he wanted. He wanted her to become impatient. He wanted her to reveal her methods. He wanted the woman behind the empire to step into the spotlight before she was ready. So she did something unexpected. She became even quieter. While everyone around her expected a dramatic response, Valentina returned to the strategy that had protected her for years. Observation. She studied Lorenzo's actions carefully. She searched for patterns. She examined the people around him and looked for the one mistake every powerful person eventually made. Overconfidence. Meanwhile, Adrian faced his own internal struggle. Many members of the organization questioned whether he was still the true leader after discovering Valentina's role. Some believed the empire needed a traditional Don who controlled everything openly. Adrian understood their concerns, but he also understood something they did not. A leader was not defined by who received the most attention. A leader was defined by who could protect the people depending on them. And nobody understood protection better than Valentina. Instead of feeling threatened by her influence, Adrian stood beside her. He knew their strength came from working together, not competing for control. Their partnership became stronger because the secret was finally out. But Lorenzo was not finished. He launched his final move by targeting the one thing Valentina valued more than power: trust. He revealed information that suggested someone close to Valentina had been hiding a secret for years. The discovery created uncertainty inside the Moretti Empire and forced Valentina to question even the people she believed she understood. For the first time in years, she faced a situation she could not immediately predict. The enemy had found the one weakness she never expected: a hidden truth from her own past. And when Valentina uncovered the identity of the person connected to that secret, she realized the battle was no longer about saving the empire. It was about discovering who had been controlling the game from the beginning. For years, the Moretti Empire had operated under one powerful image. Adrian Moretti was the Don, the leader whose name carried fear and respect across the criminal world. Every rival family knew his reputation. Every ally understood his authority. Every enemy believed that defeating Adrian would mean destroying everything he had built. But after years of hidden battles, the truth finally reached the surface. The empire was never controlled by one person. The power behind the Moretti organization came from the partnership between Adrian Moretti and Valentina Cross. However, the world was not ready to accept that the woman they had ignored was the person who had protected them all along. The final evidence against Lorenzo Devereux exposed the full conspiracy. His plan had not started with a simple desire for territory or money. He had spent years trying to understand the hidden structure behind the Moretti Empire because he knew something others did not. Adrian was dangerous, but Valentina was unpredictable. Lorenzo believed that removing Valentina would create confusion and allow him to take control. He believed the organization would fall apart once people discovered that the woman behind Adrian's success was no longer there. Instead, his plan created the opposite result. It forced the truth into the open. The members of the Moretti organization finally saw the reality they had ignored for years. The strategies that saved them from destruction, the alliances that protected their future, and the decisions that kept enemies away were connected to Valentina's intelligence. The woman they considered a silent figure had been their strongest defense. For Valentina, the moment was not about proving herself. She had never needed approval from people who refused to see her. The real challenge was accepting that hiding was no longer possible. For years, remaining invisible had protected her. It allowed her to influence events without becoming a target. But now the entire world knew who she was. And with recognition came responsibility. Valentina understood that power was not simply about making decisions. It was about accepting the consequences of those decisions. She had spent years protecting Adrian's empire from the shadows. Now she had to decide what kind of future that empire would have. Would it continue through fear and old traditions? Or would it become something stronger? Adrian supported her decision because he knew the truth better than anyone. His greatest strength was not his ability to command others. It was his ability to recognize the person who truly made him stronger. Their partnership changed the structure of the empire. Old leaders who resisted change were replaced by people who understood loyalty and intelligence. The organization became more strategic, less dependent on outdated traditions, and more prepared for future challenges. The enemies who once underestimated Valentina were forced to accept reality. They had not been fighting Adrian Moretti's empire. They had been fighting the mind that protected it. But victory did not erase every mystery. After the collapse of Lorenzo's plan, Valentina returned to the hidden documents that started the entire investigation. She expected to find answers about her enemy's strategy. Instead, she discovered something far more personal. Inside the final file was information about her own rise to power. The documents revealed that someone had predicted her influence years before she ever became the Don's wife. Someone had known exactly what Valentina would become. And the final page contained a message that changed everything. It suggested that her journey to control the empire had not been accidental. It had been planned long before she understood her own power. The truth that finally came to light changed the history of the Moretti Empire forever. For years, people had remembered Adrian Moretti as the man who built one of the most powerful organizations in America. His name represented authority, fear, and influence. But history had only recorded half of the story. The missing part was Valentina Cross. The woman who stood beside him quietly. The woman who watched while others underestimated her. The woman who carried the weight of an entire empire without asking anyone to notice. The final documents discovered after Lorenzo Devereaux's defeat revealed that Valentina's rise had never been a coincidence. Long before she became Adrian's wife, certain powerful figures had recognized her intelligence and ability to understand people. They knew she possessed something rare. The ability to see the future before others could see the present. But Valentina never wanted to become powerful simply for the sake of power. Unlike many people in the Mafia world who chased control because they feared losing it, she understood that true leadership came from responsibility. Power without purpose destroyed people. Power with discipline could protect them. That belief shaped every decision she made. After the truth became public, the perception of Valentina changed completely. The same people who once ignored her presence now studied her decisions carefully. Rivals who once viewed her as Adrian's weakness began treating her as the greatest obstacle standing between them and victory. The empire no longer hid her influence. It respected it. Adrian Moretti also changed after everything was revealed. For years, he had carried the responsibility of being the public face of the organization. He believed strength meant carrying every burden alone. Valentina showed him something different. A true leader did not need to stand above everyone else. A true leader knew when to stand beside someone equally powerful. Together, they transformed the Moretti Empire into something their enemies never expected. They moved away from the old traditions that depended only on fear and created a system based on loyalty, intelligence, and careful decisions. The people who remained loyal were not those who feared losing power. They were those who understood the value of trust. For Valentina, the greatest victory was not becoming recognized. It was no longer needing to hide. The woman who once walked through rooms unnoticed became the person everyone listened to. The woman who was once introduced only as the Don's wife became known as the strategist who changed the entire structure of the empire. Her journey was not about proving that she was stronger than men. It was about proving that power could exist in a different form. Sometimes power was not the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes power was the person who already knew what everyone else would do next. Years later, the Moretti legacy continued, but the world remembered the moment everything changed. It was the moment everyone discovered that the empire they feared was never controlled by one person. It was created by two minds working together. However, the final secret hidden in Valentina's old documents remained unanswered. Among the papers was one final file that had never been opened. Inside was a message from someone connected to her past, revealing that her journey toward power had been watched from the beginning. The message contained one final warning. Valentina had spent years believing she became the woman behind the throne because of the choices she made. But the truth suggested something far more mysterious. Someone had been preparing her for that role long before she ever knew she was destined to take it.